Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum where all voices matter. I'd like to welcome back David Clement, who is no relation, but who has been a guest of this program in the past. David is the North American Affairs Manager of the Consumer Choice Center. Welcome back to Boom and Bust.
Thank you very much for having me.
I know you have recently written about the 2 drinks per week advice issued by
hmm
by a federal government agency. Tell us a little bit more about that and your reaction to it.
Yeah, so essentially what's happened is the Canadian Centre for Substance Use and Addiction, which is not technically part of the government, but almost exclusively funded by the government, has come up with new alcohol guidelines that are radically different from what we've had in the past. So they've taken what is generally speaking the suggestion of no more than 2 drinks per day and scaled it all the way down to no more than 2 drinks per week. There are a couple reasons why this is a problem. One is the evidence, even in their own tables, doesn't really suggest that that's an appropriate guideline. And two, that suggestion is so divorced from reality, it will likely cause consumers to disregard any guidance because more than 2 drinks a week for anyone who casually drinks is so low that they may kind of cast off any guidance as sensational and misguided. And so our concern is one, the evidence isn't necessarily there to make that type of a radical shift. And two, we could end up doing more harm than good in terms of the willingness of drinkers to listen to health guidance in regards to alcohol consumption.
Is this science? I mean, I know this is a loaded term these days, whether something is science or not science or based on science, but it just seems to have come, as you say, come right out of the blue, right?
Well, yes, the researchers who've put this report together seem to be ignoring that for whatever reason, there is something called a J curve that exists. And that is when you look at all cause mortality, those who drink moderately, which is usually one, two, a maximum of two per day, actually see a lower incidence of all cause morality or mortality than those who abstain. Now, that isn't a suggestion to start drinking if you don't. There are a variety of good reasons why people don't drink, whether personal choice, health, or religious groundings, or what have you. But it does put a serious dent in the idea that having more than 2 drinks a week is risky. And when we look at the changes in risk, this is really a concern for me, is that often we'll see these claims that will say something like, for women, 14 drinks per week, which is roughly the old average, um, increases the risk of breast cancer by something like 29%.
Right.
And when you hear that number, that's pretty jarring. That is a scary figure. Breast cancer is certainly a serious matter. But when we look at the change in absolute risk, so what it is from the baseline of premature deaths, that figure is not nearly the same in regards to what the impact is for consumers. And we're looking at a 0.002% change in risk, or 2.2
Gotcha.
one hundredths of a percent.
Yeah. So, okay. So, and we may have to split this into the next segment too, but uh, from your basis point, then, should this be a government concern at all? I mean, should we be getting advice like this from government? I guess is the question.
I mean, if we're going to talk about problematic drinkers, about 15% of drinkers fall into that category under the old guidelines. I think that's appropriate. I think giving people information is appropriate. But when we look at some of the suggestions from groups like the CCSA, where they want cancer warnings on alcohol bottles, essentially following the tobacco playbook, that falsely equates drinking with smoking. And I think that's a huge mistake. because the data there, like I pointed out with breast cancer, not something to downplay,
Right.
but we have to give consumers the real risk figures. And when you do that, I think it paints a very different picture.
Interesting.